It was the summer of 1942, and the night sky above the Eastern Front was a graveyard of smoke and flame. The German war machine had torn its way deep into Soviet territory, leaving nothing but ashes behind. Entire villages vanished under fire, and the cold Russian wind carried the smell of death across endless fields. Soldiers on both sides had seen horrors beyond words. Yet among the German ranks, a strange rumor began to spread. It wasn't about tanks or snipers or some new Soviet weapon. It was something far more unsettling. They whispered of ghostly figures who flew through the darkness, unseen and unheard, until the moment death fell from the sky. The men called them Nachthexen, the night witches. Some said they flew on broomsticks, others swore they could vanish into thin air. All agreed on one thing. Once you heard that eerie whoosh in the night, your chances of seeing dawn were gone. At first, the stories were laughed off. After all, the Germans were hardened soldiers. They didn't believe in witches or ghosts. But as the attacks continued, precise, silent, and devastating, fear began to seep into their hearts. Searchlights combed the skies, but they found nothing. Anti-aircraft guns roared, but hit only darkness. The men would watch helplessly as bombs rained down on their camps, turning supply depots and fuel stores into towering infernos. Survivors described the sound. Not an engine, not a roar, but a soft, gliding hiss, like the wind itself had come alive to strike them. That sound would become their nightmare. Many German soldiers later admitted that they would rather face tanks than the unseen night witches who haunted the skies above them. But these so-called witches were no supernatural beings. They were young women, ordinary in appearance, extraordinary in courage. Some were barely 20 years old, others had never seen a battlefield before. Many had grown up dreaming of flight. Inspired by the famous Soviet aviator Marina Raskova, often called the Russian Amelia Earhart, Raskova was a national hero, known for her record-breaking flights and fearless spirit. When the war erupted, she received countless letters from young women across the Soviet Union, students, teachers, nurses, all pleading to join the fight. They didn't want to stay behind the lines. They wanted to defend their homeland with their own hands, even if it meant dying for it. Raskova took their words to heart. She gathered the courage to approach Joseph Stalin himself, demanding that women be allowed to serve as combat pilots. Stalin agreed, partly out of desperation, but also because Raskova's determination left him no room to refuse. And so, in October 1941, an unprecedented decision was made. 3 all-female air regiments would be formed within the Soviet Air Force. One of them, the 588th Night Bomber Regiment, would soon write its name into history, not with ink, but with fire in the night sky. When the first volunteers arrived at their base, they were met not with respect, but with ridicule. Male soldiers mocked them, calling them little girls and Stalin's pets. Their equipment was pitiful. Instead of proper flight suits, they were issued oversized men's uniforms. Their boots were so big that they stuffed them with paper and straw to make them fit. Their planes were even worse, fragile biplanes made of wood and canvas, open cockpits that exposed them to freezing winds. These Polikarpov Po-2 aircraft were originally designed for training and crop dusting, not for combat. They had no armor, no radio, no parachutes. A single bullet could set them on fire. The male pilots joked that these little birds wouldn't last a single night at the front. But the women didn't laugh. They trained hard, harder than anyone expected. Under Raskova's leadership, they learned to read the stars for navigation, to fly by instinct when instruments failed, and to repair their own aircraft when mechanics refused to help. They studied the terrain by memory, memorizing every river, forest, and hill. What they lacked in technology, they made up for with skill and daring. Soon they discovered that their flimsy little planes had one advantage. They were quiet, very quiet. So quiet, in fact, that when the pilots cut the engine mid-air, the Po-2 would glide through the darkness like a phantom. The Germans couldn't hear them coming until it was too late. They painted flowers on their planes, braided their hair before flights, and sang softly before takeoff. They carried photographs of loved ones, tiny good luck charms, even pressed flowers hidden in their uniforms. These small reminders of life became their armor. Because deep down, every night witch knew any mission could be her last. Still, as dawn broke and the smoke settled over enemy lines, they would return to base, exhausted but smiling. Against all logic, all odds, they had survived another night. The night witches were not just fighting a war, they were rewriting what it meant to be a soldier. By 1943, the night witches had become the silent shadow of the Eastern Front, invisible by day, unstoppable by night. Their missions grew bolder, their targets deadlier. They no longer bombed just supply camps or fuel depots. Now they struck railroads, bridges, and heavily fortified German positions. Every mission was a race against death. The enemy had adapted. Searchlights grew sharper, anti-aircraft fire thicker. The sky itself seemed to turn against them. The night witches flew through storms of shrapnel, weaving through fiery tracer rounds that clawed at the darkness. The explosions painted the night with flashes of red and white, but through it all, their little wooden planes kept gliding, quiet, fearless, and unstoppable. Some missions felt like suicide. Once, during a blinding snowstorm, 3 Potus were separated by the wind. One plane, flown by a young pilot named Tatiana, lost her bearings entirely. Her compass had frozen solid, and her engine sputtered with ice. She could have turned back, but she didn't. She flew low, following the flicker of enemy fires below her, guessing her way through the storm. When she finally spotted the target, she cut her engine and glided down, releasing her bombs with perfect accuracy before disappearing into the blizzard. Hours later, when she returned to base, her face was frozen and her hands were bleeding, but her eyes were alive. Her commander asked how she found her way. Tatiana simply smiled and said, "The night showed me the way." That kind of courage became the soul of the regiment. They flew 8, sometimes 15 missions in one night. They slept in their flight suits, boots still covered in frost, because there was no time to rest. When the alarm sounded, they ran to their planes, hearts pounding, frost crunching under their feet. The Potus would take off one after another, their propellers kicking up snow and dust until the airfield itself vanished into mist. Above them, the stars were their only allies. Each mission demanded everything: focus, calm, and a strange kind of faith. The night witches didn't fight with strength. They fought with precision, patience, and willpower carved from steel. Even the enemy began to respect them. The Germans offered a medal, the Iron Cross, to any pilot who could shoot one down. But it rarely happened. The Potus flew too low, too slow, and too cunningly. The German fighters, built for speed, often overshot them or stalled trying to follow their impossible maneuvers. The night witches would vanish into the treetops, glide silently, and strike again when least expected. The Luftwaffe began to dread the sound of the night breeze itself, for it might be carrying the witches on its wings. Some German soldiers refused to light cigarettes at night, fearing the faint glow would draw a witch's bomb. The fear had become psychological, the kind that eats at a soldier's mind, even when the sky is clear. But behind the victories, the losses grew. Planes didn't always come back. Sometimes a Potu went down in flames, lighting the sky like a falling star. The women on the ground would look up, their hearts breaking, knowing exactly what that light meant. Yet the next night, they flew again. There was no time to cry, no space for grief, only duty.